Wars is part of the Rippin podcast network. In this episode of Cardboard Wars, join hosts Ben Rippin, Kevin Rips, and Jake M46 as they dive into the history and evolution of the UFC. This episode explores the groundbreaking origins of the UFC and the evolution of mixed martial arts into a global phenomenon. Learn about the pivotal figures that shaped the sport and learn about the growing market of UFC sports cards and their future potential within the broader collectibles industry. So sit back and enjoy this episode of Cardboard Wars.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is Cardboard Wars. And today I'm joined with Kevin Rips and my buddy Jake, who goes by M46 online. Ladies and gentlemen, we make podcasts, YouTube videos, and content about sports, the players, and the cards that honor them. And today, we're going back to November 12th, 1993 in Denver, Colorado. This is not Vegas. This is not Madison Square. This is not even a $1 billion broadcast deal. This is just a modest event center and a question. There were no rankings. There were no pound for pound debates, no unified rules, no weight classes, just one challenge. What is the most effective fighting style in the world? And it was inside a steel cage, not a ring, a steel cage. 8 men prepared to answer it. A boxer, a karate specialist, a kickboxer, a sumo wrestler, a savage fighter, a taekwondo fighter, and a quiet Brazilian wearing a white gi named Royce Gracie. Nobody in that arena fully understood what they were about to witness.
See, the early UFC wasn't trying to build a league. It wasn't pitching network television. It wasn't thinking about billion-dollar valuations or international expansion. It was trying to settle an argument. For decades, martial arts disciplines all claimed superiority. Boxing said hands win. Wrestling said control wins. Karate said precision wins. But the Gracie family believed something different. They believed Brazilian jiu-jitsu could neutralize size, strength, and aggression. One of the architects behind the event, Art Davie, partnered with the Gracies to build something radical. Instead of debating which style worked best, they would test it, and they did it live. The event was called UFC 1. There was almost no rules, no rounds, no judges, no time limits, minimal fouls. It wasn't positioned as a sport. It was marketed as an experiment.
I mean, the structure itself told you that. They didn't even build a ring. They built a cage, 8 sides, no corners to hide in, no ropes to fall through, no escape. You had to solve the problem that was right in front of you. That design choice, it wasn't an aesthetic. It was philosophical. When the fights began, most viewers expected complete chaos. They expected knockouts. They expected brutality. Instead, they saw something colder. Royce Gracie didn't trade punches. He closed distance. He clinched. He tripped opponents. He dragged men much larger than him to the ground and then submitted them. But he did it calmly, methodically. I mean, it was clinically, actually.
Gerard is in a lot of trouble. Now, what Royce is going to do is try to get Gerard to raise his neck. I bet he slaps in the back of the neck a couple of times, Bill. Yep.
See, again,
and hands underneath. This
is a major part of fighting. People do not understand that this is very strong.
It's got to be a great joke. It's over.
It's over. That was just Listen to that. Hoist is not letting him go. He wants to make sure the referee sees that this is over, Bill.
The audience didn't actually understand what they were even watching. Commentators struggled to describe the chokes and the joint locks. Most Americans had never seen anything like this before. There were moments of confusion in the arena, even silence, because the narrative was shifting in absolute real time.
And the question stopped being about who hits harder and became about what actually works. And that was the shift that was disruptive, because suddenly martial arts wasn't theoretical. They were being stress tested in public, and some long laid beliefs were collapsing.
But the backlash came fast. Headlines, of course, as media has always done, just focused on the brutality. The lack of rules became the story. Most notably, RIP, Senator John McCain out of Arizona labeled this as, I don't know if he was trying to be funny, but he was. He labeled it as human cockfighting, you guys. That phrase then spread nationally. Cable providers pulled the pay-per-view distribution. There were states that were starting to ban the events. Athletic commissions refused to sanction any of it. Sponsors disappeared. The UFC, it's not what people think. This sport wasn't exploding. It was suffocating.
By the mid-1990s, the promotion was fighting for survival outside of the cage. Events moved from state to state, and the regulations began to tighten. Public perception hardened. The most controversial experiments don't survive most political pressure. Most niche promotions collapse, and most of the time, the investors walk away, but for some reason, for the UFC, it didn't.
Instead it evolved. Weight classes were introduced, time limits created structure, rounds were implemented, gloves became mandatory, a formal list of fouls expanded, medical supervision became standardized, and the new no rules branding disappeared, replaced by the idea of the ultimate test under regulation. Athletic commissioners and commissions slowly began sanctioning events, and legitimacy didn't arrive overnight. It was negotiated.
Something else was happening inside the cage, though. Early UFC was style versus style, boxer versus wrestler, karate versus grappler. But by the late 90s, that model was dying. You couldn't survive as a specialist anymore. If you only struck, if you only did one thing, you were now vulnerable. If you only grappled, you were predictable.
A new athlete was emerging, one who could punch, wrestle, defend submissions, and condition for multiple rounds, many minutes. Not a pure boxer, not a pure wrestler, a hybrid, mixed martial arts. The sport was no longer about proving one discipline superior. It was about building the most complete fighter possible.
Despite these changes, the organization still struggled financially. It wasn't mainstream at that point. It wasn't profitable. And by 2000, many assumed it wouldn't last another decade. Then in 2001, the company was purchased for $2 million by the Fertitta brothers and former boxing manager named Dana White. $2 million for a controversial promotion banned in several states. And at the time, most observers thought it was a terrible investment.
But instead of running from its edge, the new ownership leaned into legitimacy. They worked aggressively with the athletic commissions. They improved their production quality. They standardized championship belts. They refined their pay-per-view strategy. They emphasized storytelling. They didn't soften the product. They sharpened it.
The cage didn't change. The intensity didn't disappear, but the perception slowly started to shift. The spectacle became structured. The experiment became more organized, And the controversy kind of moved into just being a great competition.
Yeah, and it isn't just the story of a fighting promotion. It's the story of adaptation under pressure, an idea that nearly collapsed, and a spectacle that had to earn legitimacy rule by rule, state by state, and fighter by fighter.
Because what started in 1993 as a laboratory inside of a cage wasn't done evolving. The next phase wouldn't be about the rules or the regulations. It would be about the personalities. It would be about the stars, about moments that push the UFC from survival into mainstream dominance. And that's where everything changes.
Fighting out of the blue corner, a mixed martial artist holding professional record, 17 wins, 2 losses. He stands 5 feet 9 inches tall, weighing in at 145 pounds. Fighting out of Dublin, Ireland, presenting the pride of Ireland and the #3 ranked featherweight fighter in the world, the notorious Conor McGregor!
Man, guys, I remember in the early 2000s when UFC had a fight on pay-per-view and we would all gather at the same house because none of us wanted to pay for it a la carte. We could always sucker somebody else into covering the cost. And we'd get together, hang out. We'd have a UFC party. And we were following whoever the new belt holder was. And it was fun and it was exciting. By the early 2000s, that structure of the UFC and the rules of the UFC had turned it into something different. It had ownership, namely Dana White, that pushed for it to get mainstream attention. The pay-per-view numbers in the early 2000s were still inconsistent, and there was really no way on television that you could watch it without pay-per-view. You had to maybe catch some clips on YouTube if it made its way that way. And outside of the hardcore fight fans like us, most of America still wasn't super into understanding what mixed martial arts truly was. And of course, like all the stories that we tell here on Cardboard Wars, there's always a moment, a change, you'd say.
Yeah. And gosh, I remember that too, Ben. I mean, you come in and someone would have the fights and the other people were responsible for bringing the pizza or bringing the food, right? And I specifically remember this in 2005. The UFC launched that reality show called The Ultimate Fighter. And it aired, I don't know, Spike TV. I still kind of remember as like a side channel. And the concept was really simple. I mean, unassigned fighters or unsigned fighters, where they lived together, they trained together, and they fought for a UFC contract. It wasn't just about the fights. It was about the personalities, conflict, vulnerability, ego, discipline, all the back behind the scenes training they did. And, you know, the show wasn't an instant hit. In fact, it was expensive to produce and risky for a company still fighting for stability. But the finale, specifically the fight between Forrest Griffin and Stephen Bonner, changed the trajectory of the sport overnight.
It was chaos in the best way. Back and forth exchanges. The thing about that Stephen Bonner and Forrest Griffin fight is you had two men who both refused to quit. There was blood. There was just you know, you guys know that saying. You've heard every famous athlete ever say, like, leave it all out there. Those guys truly left all they had out there in the middle of that, I guess ring is the right word. This was the kind of fight that for the casual fan, or maybe even the person that wasn't a fan yet, if they caught it, this converted them from being like maybe a skeptical fan to like, holy heck, this sport's awesome. Viewers who previously had turned, you know, kind of would put on fights casually, maybe show up like we would to our buddy's house with some beer and pizza or whatever to catch the fight when there was 10 of us chipping in. All of a sudden we're like, we had to watch every month or however often these pay-per-views were on. It was partially barbaric, but it was also, the thing is, it just was competition. And we started to realize this is maybe the highest form of competition that we'd ever seen in our lives.
And Kevin, as more and more of us began to watch the UFC, stars started to show up. The big names, 25 years later, the names that if I say, you're going to start remembering, because these are the type of fighters that could carry events. One of the first kind of breakout UFC fighters that I remember was Chuck Liddell.
Randy might be hurt. Yeah, Randy might be hurt. Randy trying to close in though now. And he goes down. He's down. And Chuck Liddell. Oh, he is the new light heavyweight champion of the world. Randy Couture is Chuck Liddell is the light heavyweight champion. Unbelievable.
He had that kind of power that could just knock somebody the F out. And he had that kind of distinctive kind of look. And he was willing to trade punches and to go the distance. And he finished fights in such a dramatic fashion that we would talk about it the next day.
Yeah, he actually, like you said, knocked people the F out. It was crazy. In fact, gosh, last year I bought a replica championship UFC belt signed by who other than the Chuck himself, right? The mohawk haircut. I mean, he was badass. And the cool thing is these guys started getting rivals, right? There were storylines that started getting created, and there was different styles of fighting now, different attitudes, and there were tensions within the whole thing, and it created a really cool fan base. And so around that same time, if you remember this guy, George St. Pierre was coming along, and he was technical. He was a calculated fighter. And GSP was just methodical. When some fighters were like relying on the chaos, he focused on preparation and control, and he would submit the shit out of me.
Yeah, but then came the Spider-Man, Anderson Silva, and that dude changed the sport entirely. Silva wasn't just winning. That dude performed when he went out there. He moved differently. He struck with precision. I mean, he strikes like a snake. Like, he fought with confidence that bordered on like he was an artist, man. When he would just dismantle opponents, and he never looked frantic. He always looked like it was almost effortless for him.
Vitor looking for the big left hand.
Outstanding head movement by Anderson.
Like we said, second to none.
Oh! He front kicked him in the face.
Absolutely rocked, trying to finish. It is all
front
over.
Kick to the face.
Anderson Silva remains the middleweight champion.
You start to have these guys in there. You mentioned GSP, who is also just super technical, and then Anderson Silva. Suddenly, the UFC is not just about these big, bad, tough dudes that kind of look like Chuck Liddell. It started to become about mastery.
We saw all these different champions come and go. We saw the business model start to change. These pay-per-view events became massive, massive revenue drivers. And you could go watch the UFC, guys, in Canada, in Europe, all over the world. This kind of activity, this sport was globally recognized. Brazil, Europe, everywhere. And then, if you guys remember, all these different MMA gyms started popping up. You could go into half the shopping centers in Scottsdale, Kevin, and probably find a jiu-jitsu or a mixed martial arts place.
Yeah. And, what was crazy is they started understanding something critical. It wasn't just about selling fights. They were moments. I remember, you guys know these guys, the Diaz brothers. Do you remember when that one brother, he was almost about to get crushed, and then out of a kneeling start, he just KO'd his opponent. I mean, that was stuff we talk about. I still talk about that. I'll still watch YouTube videos on that. I mean,
was he from your area, Jake?
Yeah, he's from Stockton. Yeah, down probably about an hour away.
209.
Don't start a fight with a skinny white guy from Stockton. You might get NF out.
And TF, dude. You might get NTF.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, that's one of the most colorful characters the sport has ever seen. Conor McGregor. This guy, he wasn't just a champion; he was a phenomenon. He had the confidence of one. It wasn't confidence; it was cockiness.
Yeah,
he just talked so much trash. He'd make predictions. He had the fashion of exactly who you would expect based on what I just described. Swagger. It's like he was trained to speak in sound bites. But what he was good at, man, and the reason I know this is why Dana put up with his shit is because that guy sold fights before he ever stepped into the octagon. And when he knocked out Jose Aldo in 13 seconds to capture the featherweight title, man, UFC crossed into a totally different stratosphere.
Here we go! Green trunks for the southpaw, the notorious Conor McGregor. Black trunks for the champion, Jose Aldo Jr.
Conor relaxed and smiling.
Oh no! He slapped him! Conor McGregor is the new UFC featherweight champion of the world!
Oh, unbelievable! Oh my God! The first punch he threw slapped him. It was a straight left, and Aldo connected with a left right afterwards as he was getting knocked out. And then hammer fist, out cold. Boom. Doesn't get any cleaner than that, ladies and gentlemen.
McGregor was one of the key people that made UFC mainstream in ways that very few fighters would have the ability to. He had this kind of crossover appeal that drove big headlined pay-per-view events that brought in the money. And remember when he eventually stepped into the boxing ring against Mayweather? It was one of the most financially successful combat events in history. And it wasn't just a fight, it was a little bit of validation.
Yeah, and speaking of that, Ben, I mean, those combat cards that they have out, those prisms and those kabooms are sick with the Floyds and the Connors. I love those cards. And
the butter beans.
The butter beans. Yes, the butter beans. Yes, those are awesome. And, to this point, I mean, at this point in time now that the UFC wasn't trying to survive, it was literally dominating. It had stars across divisions. And then you had the Ronda Rousey, and she came in and helped open the door for women's MMA. I mean, I look at her and watch her, and I'd be afraid to meet her in a dark alley and get KO'd by her.
I'd be afraid to meet most of the girls that you hang around with, Jake.
That's a fair comment. Fair comment.
That reminds me, I was in San Antonio last week.
So now they were, the cool thing is that at this point they're not just athletes anymore. They're literally personalities and that big social media. So yeah.
Yeah, I remember my girl Rhonda. She was on my favorite TV show of all time, Entourage, and Turtle had the biggest crush on her, and she kicked his ass. Anyways, that totally changed the power dynamic. In fact, anybody who's who watched from the early days, they know that Dana White never wanted to allow women to fight, but Ronda Rousey. Dude, it wasn't until her that he changed his mind. She changed all that. So that completely changed the power dynamics. And I think fighters started to, like in other sports, the athletes started to understand their value. Negotiations became public. Contracts would sometimes be headline news. The sport really has matured into a legitimate global entertainment property.
And go back in time. Remember, Jake, how much Dana bought the UFC for?
Yeah. It was $2 million.
$2 million. Well, in 2016, the UFC sold, Kevin, to a private equity group called Endeavor for over $4 billion. $4 billion. That's crazy.
That's crazy. That's insane. What's that? What X is that? That's crazy. It happens essentially because the product evolved. And it didn't come easy either, guys. I mean, you had a situation where they almost collapsed early on in their years, but then they just came and they started, the storytelling improved. The fans started connecting through these journeys. And I mean, at the end of the day, the UFC didn't just build champions. I mean, it built eras.
It wasn't built by the owners. It was built by somebody else, Kevin.
Yeah. Every era of the UFC and truly MMA had a different face. We talked about Chuck Liddell earlier, talked about GSP. This is George St. Pierre. Talked about Anderson Silva, Ronda Rousey, Conor McGregor, fighters who they define not just divisions, but literal time periods and eras. And with every dominant run, new contenders start to emerge. And actually, crazy thing is they start getting better and better. So this machine just kept moving and growing.
Not to mention Hoist Gracie and some of the OGs back when there was no rounds and no time limits. And I still have all the original UFCs on a VHS tape for when I break out my VCR, boys. When you come and visit, we'll watch some.
Does that come in high def or is that 4K?
It does.
What other kind of tapes do you have there, buddy?
Don't dig deep in the drawer. You're going to end up with Red Dawn, Rad, all the hits. My high school graduation video. Be careful, Kevin.
Mm-hmm.
Today, the UFC operates on a global schedule. Abu Dhabi, London, Sydney, Vegas, Vancouver, BC, Toronto, Seattle, New York, Dallas, every continent, most states, and there's champions representing countries all over the world. This is now a worldwide enterprise.
But what makes the UFC super unique compared to like traditional sports, football, basketball is it's literally built on individuals. There's no jerseys, there's no franchises, no city loyalty in the traditional sense, unless you're talking about Liddell. I mean, he has his whole country that comes to a fight. It's the loyalty to the fighters, to the personalities, and to their rivals.
And that creates volatility, right? One knockout can change everything. An upset can shift the entire landscape. A rising star can redefine a weight class what seems like overnight. And that unpredictability of what can happen is part of the appeal of the UFC and MMA.
Yeah, from a near ban in the 90s to this complete global expansion of a business that's worth billions and billions and billions and billions. Who knows how much today? The rise of the UFC wasn't smooth. It wasn't guaranteed, but it's grown. It's even grown into sports cards, which is what we talk about. UFC sports cards were first released, I think, by Topps.
Yeah, and for years, Ben, MMA cards were a small corner of the hobby. Early Topps releases beginning in 2009 had loyal collectors, but really limited mainstream traction. Then Panini entered the US space in 2021 and introduced Prism Select, actually. And they had the gold parallels, the black 101s, and the same tiered chase system that exists in basketball and football and everything else. And once that infrastructure arrived, everything changed. Scarcity plus star power. And, there was speculation. And with speculation on who was going to be the next star, that starts bringing real money into this. So, Kevin, for comps, what are you seeing out there from some of these sales here?
Yeah, 2017 UFC Chrome Superfractor, Conor McGregor, graded PSA 10, sold for a little over $73,000 back in February of 22 through Golden. In 21 Panini Prism, gold Prism of Conor McGregor, also graded a PSA 10, sold for $26,400 in August of 21. So those are a couple of the big ones. Let's take a look at Khabib I'm not going to try to say his last name right now. Yeah, everybody knows who Khabib is. In 2021 Panini Select Signatures Black Disco Prism Autograph graded PSA 10. Man, that is a mouthful. Sold for approximately $24,000 in October of 2021. By the way, side note, Khabib retired undefeated, 29-0. That's important. When a fighter retires undefeated, yeah, that's like the narrative freezes. There's no losses that can come chip away at the perception. And it's kind of cool because in collectibles, the finality of a career can create real stability for card values going forward.
I mean, who knows what the history of sports cards is with the UFC, but you're seeing sports cards touch not just the UFC, but all forms of martial arts and combat. In fact, you're even seeing products by Panini roll out a combat product that includes wrestlers, boxers, UFC fighters. I pulled a Hulk Hogan auto the other day out of a box, a Butterbean Kaboom, a Mike Tyson Kaboom. There's some cool products out there for us sports card nerds. Panini Prism, Topps UFC Knockout, they're Topps Finest UFC. There is a variety of products. If you want to get nerdy and you want to diversify from your basketball, football, baseball, hockey buckets, we want you here at Cardboard Wars to get a box of UFC, get in early, and let's see what these cards turn into over time, because they could be something special for your collection. Any last thoughts, boys?
You know, I was gonna say, Ben, I'm curious of your take on this because, you know, when we look at these cards, they're new. Like we've talked about the beginning of hockey and basketball and baseball and football on this show, right? And even golf for that matter. But the oldest MMA or UFC card's not that old. So it's like, feels like very early on in the cycle. And MMA as a sport has only gotten more and more popular over the years. It makes me wonder 5, 10, 15 years down the road, if we could see these, this card market, you know, mature like some of the more traditional sports cards.
My guess is it does, Kev. I have to assume, you know, maybe we'll do an episode in the future on F1 or NASCAR or some of the other sports that are out there. You know, when a Pokemon card sells for $16 million, you know that there's room out there for diehard collectors to collect cards in any sport. I even saw a collection of women's volleyball cards the other day. There's plenty of options for those of us nerds that are collecting. Final words?
I got a bunch of those. They stick together and stuff, but
Jake, final words?
No, I think, Kevin, you guys are spot on. I mean, 2021, what was that, 5 years ago? And if you look at 20, I mean, the highest card is about 132,000. So that's a pretty high sale of the Khabib 101 Superfractor. And, you know, I think these cards have some real potential, especially, like you said, Kevin, as they get bigger in the sport itself.
Do us a favor, go on YouTube, write a comment on some of our videos. We pick comments every single week from the videos to send out cards, single cards, boxes of wax, and swag. Go to YouTube, subscribe, make a comment. You could get picked. If you're listening on Apple or any of those, give us a review. Same thing. Appreciate everything all of you do for Cardboard Wars. We'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening to Cardboard Wars on the Rippin Podcast Network. Don't forget to leave a rating and review and check out rippin.com to get connected to what we have coming up. Find us on Instagram and let us know what you would like to hear about on a future episode of Cardboard Wars. Until next time, keep ripping.